5. Nannies couldn't handle it. But the black cleaning lady shocked everyone. Jennifer Wilson held the phone with trembling hands as yet another nanny agency refused her desperate request. 5 highly qualified professionals had quit in just 2 months, all claiming the 3 children were impossible to control. At that moment, baby Ethan's screams echoed through the Beverly Hills mansion, while twins Mason and Logan ran through the living room, knocking over everything in their path. The last nanny had left in the early hours of the previous morning, leaving a note saying she'd never seen such difficult children in 15 years of work. "Please, Mrs. Wilson, you need to understand our position," said the agent on the other end of the line. "We've sent our best professionals, and none could last more than 2 weeks. The children simply won't accept care." Jennifer hung up and collapsed onto the Italian leather couch, her eyes red from crying. As an executive at a multinational company, she was used to solving any problem with planning and resources, but her own children had become an unsolvable puzzle. Baby Ethan, just 8 months old, refused bottles from anyone but her, crying for hours until he turned purple. The twins, Mason and Logan, who had just turned 4 the week before, seemed to have developed a supernatural resistance to any form of discipline or routine. The doorbell rang exactly at 8 in the morning. Jennifer quickly wiped her tears and went to answer, expecting yet another nanny sent by an agency. Instead, she found a black woman around 50 years old, her hair pulled into a flawless bun, wearing a simple but well-kept navy blue uniform. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Dorothy Johnson. I'm here about the cleaning position you advertised in the paper." Jennifer blinked a few times, trying to process the information. Over the last 2 months, she had been so focused on finding nannies that she'd completely forgotten about the cleaning job she'd placed 3 weeks earlier. "Oh yes, the cleaning position. Please, come in." The moment Dorothy stepped into the main room, something extraordinary happened. Ethan's deafening cries, which had been coming from the bedroom for over an hour, stopped completely. The sudden silence was so striking that even the twins stopped running to look toward the hallway. "Sorry for the mess," Jennifer said, embarrassed by the toys scattered everywhere, cushions thrown on the floor, and sticky fingerprints on the pale walls. "I've been having some trouble with—" She didn't finish her sentence. A sharp, desperate wail echoed through the house again, this time from upstairs. Dorothy lifted her head toward the sound, her experienced eyes catching nuances others missed. "May I?" she asked, gesturing discreetly toward the stairs. Jennifer hesitated for a moment. It was completely irregular to let a stranger go up to the children's rooms, but desperation won out. "Of course, go ahead." Dorothy climbed the stairs with firm but silent steps, following the cries to the baby's room. Through the slightly open door, she saw little Ethan lying in his crib, his face red and wet with tears, fists clenched from the effort of demanding attention. Without asking permission, she entered the room and approached the crib. The baby looked at her for a moment, surprised by the new face, but kept crying. Dorothy reached out and picked him up with confident, natural movements. "Easy now, sweetheart," she murmured in a soft but firm voice. "Let Aunt Dorothy see what's going on here." She began to hum a soft melody, a lullaby her own grandmother had taught her decades ago as she gently rocked the baby. The words flowed naturally, carrying a story that spanned generations. "Hush now, my little one, for night is drawing near. Close your tired eyes, for Mommy's here to soothe you." The effect was almost magical. Ethan gradually stopped crying, his sobs fading into weary sighs, his blue eyes fixed on Dorothy's face, as if he had finally found someone who understood his language. Downstairs, Jennifer had come up to see what was happening and froze in the bedroom doorway at the sight before her. The woman who had come seeking a job as a cleaner had managed to calm her son in just a few minutes, something she and 5 professional nannies hadn't been able to do in weeks. "How did you—" she started to ask, but was interrupted by hurried footsteps in the hallway. Mason and Logan appeared at the door, curious about the unusual silence that had settled over the house. When they saw the unfamiliar woman holding their baby brother, they approached slowly, like cautious but intrigued little animals. "Who are you?" asked Mason, the more talkative of the two. "I'm Aunt Dorothy," she replied, still gently swaying Ethan. And you must be Mason and Logan, right? The boys exchanged glances, surprised she knew their names. Logan, shyer, hid behind his brother, but kept watching her with interest. How do you know our names? Mason pressed. Because your mommy told me she has two very special boys in this house, Dorothy answered, winking at them. And I can see she was right. Jennifer watched the interaction with a mix of fascination and disbelief. The twins, who were usually wary and even aggressive with strangers, seemed genuinely drawn to Dorothy's presence. Mrs. Dorothy, she finally said, didn't you come for the cleaning position? I did, Mrs. Wilson, but I see you have more pressing needs here, she replied, still cradling Ethan, who was now fast asleep in her arms. Just then, a sharp voice echoed from downstairs. Jennifer, where are you, girl? I came to see how my grandchildren are doing. Jennifer's expression instantly changed, tension replacing curiosity. It was the voice of Mrs. Barbara, her mother-in-law, a 68-year-old woman who had become a constant presence in the house ever since Richard, her husband, had left for a business trip 3 months ago. It's Grandma Barbara, she whispered to the twins, who immediately lost interest in Dorothy and ran to hide in the next room. Jennifer, Mrs. Barbara shouted again, now stomping up the stairs. What's this about hiring another nanny without consulting me? The woman stormed into the bedroom like a tempest, her perfectly styled grey hair and designer outfit a clear mark of her social status. Her sharp, beady eyes scanned the room before landing on Dorothy, who still held Ethan in her arms. And who is this? She asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. Mrs. Barbara, this is Mrs. Dorothy Johnson. She came for the cleaning position, but... Cleaner? Her mother-in-law cut in, narrowing her eyes. Then what's a cleaner doing in my grandson's room? Dorothy remained calm, continuing to rock Ethan gently. She had enough experience with women like Mrs. Barbara to know that any defensiveness would only make things worse. The baby was crying, Ma'am. I just soothed him, she replied politely but without submission. Soothed him? Mrs. Barbara stepped closer, noticing for the first time that Ethan was peacefully asleep. How? I sang a little song my grandmother taught me. Sometimes babies just need some tenderness and patience. The simple, direct answer irritated Mrs. Barbara even more. How could a woman with no formal qualifications succeed where nannies with college degrees had failed? Jennifer, I need to speak with you, now, she said, leaving the room with heavy footsteps. Jennifer looked at Dorothy, who discreetly signaled that she'd stay with the children. Reluctantly, she went downstairs, knowing she'd find her mother-in-law in her most explosive state. Have you completely lost your mind? Mrs. Barbara attacked as soon as they reached the living room. Some random maid handling my grandchildren? What if she's a kidnapper? Mrs. Barbara, please, Jennifer interrupted, trying to keep her voice low. You saw how Ethan calmed down with her. We haven't managed that in weeks. So what? That doesn't mean anything. Anyone can get lucky once. You can't let some... She gestured vaguely toward the upper floor. A woman like that have access to the children. Jennifer knew exactly what her mother-in-law meant by a woman like that, but she chose not to confront the prejudice directly right then. She was too tired for a racial argument, even though she knew it was inevitable. Mrs. Barbara, 5 nannies with excellent references couldn't even last 2 weeks here. If you have a better suggestion, I do, her mother-in-law cut in. My friend Margaret knows an international agency that only works with European professionals, German and English nannies, far more qualified and trustworthy. And far more expensive, Jennifer muttered. Money isn't an issue. Richard left a card open to handle this situation. What we can't do is put my grandchildren in just anyone's hands. At that moment, a soft melody drifted down the stairs. Dorothy had started singing again, this time a different song, and the sound of children's giggles mingled with her voice. Mason and Logan, who had hidden earlier, had apparently returned to their brother's room. Mrs. Barbara stopped speaking abruptly, her attention caught by the sounds from upstairs. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her grandchildren laugh so freely and joyfully. What song is that? She asked, almost without meaning to. I don't know, Jennifer admitted, but the kids seemed to love it. They went upstairs together, drawn by curiosity. In Ethan's room, they found a scene neither expected. Dorothy was sitting on the floor with the baby in her lap, while Mason and Logan sat on either side, all singing a children's song that mixed English words with rhythmic sounds. Pom, pom, pom. Little heart beats slow. Pom, pom, pom. Baby's eyes will close. Shut them tight and drift to sleep. Angels watching you they'll keep. The twins clapped along, their faces lit with genuine smiles. Ethan, though still drowsy, moved his little arms as if trying to follow the melody. "Grandma!" Mason shouted when he saw them at the door. "Aunt Dorothy knows lots of cool songs." "She taught us one about a bird," Logan added, breaking from his usual shyness. Mrs. Barbara was speechless for a few seconds. She couldn't process the sight before her. Her grandchildren, who usually cried, screamed, and threw tantrums, were calm, happy, and interacting harmoniously with a woman they'd met less than an hour ago. "Mom," Dorothy said, standing carefully so as not to wake Ethan, "may I put the baby in his crib? He's sleeping deeply now." Jennifer nodded, watching as Dorothy handled Ethan with precise, confident movements. The baby didn't stir during the transfer, continuing to sleep peacefully. "How did you learn to do that?" Jennifer asked quietly. "I raised 6 children on my own, ma'am. I learned that each child has their own language, their own needs. You just have to pay attention to what they're trying to say." "6 children?" repeated Mrs. Barbara, her voice heavy with implied judgment. "Yes, ma'am. 2 of my own and 4 I took in when they were orphaned. All grown now, thank God." The simple, proud answer left Mrs. Barbara unsettled. She had expected some sign of shame or defensiveness, but Dorothy spoke of her family with the same ease as one might talk about the weather. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. "Aunt Dorothy," Mason called, tugging at the hem of her uniform, "are you going to stay here with us?" The innocent question created a palpable tension among the 3 women. Jennifer looked hopeful, Mrs. Barbara clearly displeased, and Dorothy waited for an answer that wasn't hers alone to give. "That depends on your mum, sweetheart," she replied diplomatically. "Mom," Logan joined his brother. "Let Aunt Dorothy stay, she's nice." Jennifer felt her heart tighten. It had been months since she'd seen her boys so excited and happy about an adult's presence. All the previous nannies had been met with hostility, tantrums, and resistance, but Dorothy had achieved the impossible, winning over all 3 children in minutes. "Mrs. Johnson," Jennifer finally said, "you mentioned you came for the cleaning position, but I was wondering if you'd consider caring for the children as well." "Jennifer," Mrs. Barbara hissed in warning. "Mrs. Barbara, you said yourself Richard left the decision about the kids up to me. This is the solution." "It's not the same thing, and you know it," her mother-in-law snapped, her voice rising. "Hiring qualified professionals is one thing, but handing my grandchildren over to—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to say something outright prejudiced in front of the children. Mason and Logan watched her curiously, unaware of the growing tension among the adults. Dorothy remained calm through it all, her experienced eyes reading the family dynamics with precision. She knew this situation well: wealthy families with problems money couldn't solve, controlling in-laws, overwhelmed mothers, and children who paid the price for adult conflicts. "If I may, Mrs. Wilson," she said gently, "perhaps we could try a trial run. A day or 2 to see how the children adjust, and you can decide if my work meets your expectations." It was a wise suggestion, offering a diplomatic way out for everyone. Jennifer could test without commitment, Mrs. Barbara wouldn't have to accept or reject outright, and the children could adjust gradually. "I think that's an excellent idea," Jennifer agreed quickly, before her mother-in-law could object. "But with supervision," Mrs. Barbara added sharply, "if this is happening, it needs proper oversight." "Of course, Mrs. Barbara. You're welcome to stay as long as you like," Dorothy replied without irony or resentment. "I'd be happy to work under your supervision." The polite, respectful response softened Mrs. Barbara's hostility slightly. She'd expected defiance or confrontation, but Dorothy displayed a quiet confidence that was hard to attack. "Well, then it's settled," Jennifer said, relieved. "Mrs. Johnson, you can start today, if that's possible." "I can, Mrs. Wilson. I just need to grab a few things from home, and I'll be back before lunch." "Don't go!" shouted Mason, running to hug Dorothy's legs. "I won't, sweetheart. I'm just going to get my things and we'll be right back," she reassured him, stroking the boy's blonde hair. After Dorothy left, the house fell strangely silent. Ethan was still fast asleep in his crib, and the twins played quietly in their room, eagerly awaiting the return of their new caregiver. "Jennifer, I hope you know what you're doing," said Mrs. Barbara, her voice heavy with concern and disapproval. "I do, Mrs. Barbara. For the first time in months, I know exactly what I'm doing." 2 hours later, Dorothy returned carrying a small travel bag and a tote with a few personal belongings. She had swapped her navy blue uniform for a more casual yet still professional outfit, and her hair was down, framing her face in natural waves. "Aunt Dorothy!" Mason and Logan shouted in unison, running to greet her at the door. "Hello, my darlings. Did you miss me?" "We did. Ethan woke up and cried until Mommy picked him up," Mason explained. "But now that you're back, he'll be okay, right?" Logan asked with the simple logic of a child. "We'll see, sweetheart. Every baby has their own way, their own personality. I need to get to know Ethan better to understand what he needs." Jennifer listened to the conversation from the top of the stairs, impressed by how Dorothy spoke to the children. She didn't use that babyish tone most adults adopted, but talked to them as little people deserving of respect and honest explanations. "Mrs. Dorothy," she called, coming downstairs, "do you need help with your things?" "No need, ma'am. I only brought the essentials." "You can settle in the maid's room. It's small, but it has its own bathroom and—" "Jennifer," interrupted Mrs. Barbara, who had spent the last 2 hours scheming ways to sabotage the arrangement. "Don't you think it's hasty to offer her a room already? We don't even know if this will work out." "Mrs. Barbara is right," Dorothy agreed diplomatically. "I can work during the day and go home at night, at least at first." "No," Mason protested. "You have to stay here. What if Ethan cries at night?" It was a fair question. Ethan had developed a habit of waking multiple times during the night, and Jennifer was exhausted from sleepless nights trying to soothe him. "Let's see how today goes," Dorothy decided. "If the baby needs care at night, I can stay over a few times a week." The first real test came at lunchtime. Jennifer had prepared baby food for Ethan, but the little one stubbornly refused anything that wasn't breast milk. The previous nannies had fought battles trying to get him to accept a bottle or solid food. "He won't eat anything," Jennifer explained, frustrated. "He only takes it when I nurse him, but I can't be here all the time. I have to go back to work next week." Dorothy watched Ethan carefully as Jennifer tried to offer him the food. The baby turned his head, pushed the spoon away with his tiny hands, and started fussing every time the plate came near. "Can I try?" Dorothy asked. "Of course, but I doubt you'll succeed. He's very stubborn." Dorothy picked Ethan up and positioned him so he could see her face clearly. Instead of reaching for the spoon right away, she began talking to him. "Hi, my little prince. Look at this yummy food Mommy made for you. Shall we try it together?" She took a tiny bit on the tip of the spoon and brought it to her own mouth, making an exaggerated expression of delight. So delicious. See how tasty it is," she said, offering the spoon for Ethan to smell. Curious about her reaction, the baby opened his mouth slightly. Dorothy took the opportunity to place a small amount of baby food, humming softly as he tasted it. To the astonishment of Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara, who watched from the kitchen door, Ethan didn't spit out the food. Instead, he opened his mouth again, asking for more. "How did you do that?" Jennifer asked, incredulous. "He was afraid of the food because no one showed him it was safe," Dorothy explained, continuing to feed Ethan calmly. "Babies learn a lot by watching." When he saw me eat and enjoy it, he felt confident to try. It was such a simple explanation that it seemed obvious in hindsight, but none of the professional nannies had thought of it. They had all tried to force-feed him through distraction, games, or sheer insistence, but none had considered the possibility that the baby might simply feel unsure. Mrs. Barbara observed the scene with a mix of fascination and irritation. How could a woman without a college degree have insights that eluded qualified professionals? It was incomprehensible and, in a way, offensive to her worldview built on clear social hierarchies. "That's just luck," she muttered to herself, but loud enough to be heard. "Maybe so, Mrs. Barbara," Dorothy agreed without defensiveness. "But luck is also a skill learned through experience." The calm, wise reply left her mother-in-law without an immediate comeback. It was hard to argue with someone who neither took offense nor defended herself, simply stating her views with serenity. After lunch came the biggest challenge: nap time. The twins, Mason and Logan, had developed a fierce resistance to daytime sleep, turning rest time into an all-out battle that usually ended with everyone crying and exhausted. "They haven't napped in weeks," Jennifer warned. The nannies tried everything: stories, classical music, letting them tire themselves out playing. Nothing worked. "Let's see what happens," Dorothy said, heading to the twins' room. Mason and Logan were clearly gearing up for an epic standoff. They had scattered toys all over the room, turned on a noisy game on the tablet, and started jumping on the bed as if it were a trampoline. "Nap time, boys," Dorothy announced calmly. "We don't want to sleep," Mason shouted. "It's too early," Logan added. "That's fine," Dorothy said, surprising them. "Then let's do something different. How about I tell you a very special story?" The boys exchanged glances, intrigued. The previous nannies had always insisted on sleep immediately, with no negotiation or alternatives. "What kind of story?" Mason asked, curiosity outweighing rebellion. "A story about two adventurous brothers who discovered a magical treasure. But I can only tell it if you're both nice and cozy in bed, under the covers." It was a clever negotiation, giving the children an apparent choice while guiding them toward the desired behavior. Unaware they were being led, Mason and Logan settled into their respective beds. "So, what's the story?" Logan asked, pulling the covers up to his chin. Dorothy sat between the two beds and began the tale in a soft yet expressive voice. "Once upon a time, there were two brothers named Mason and Logan." The boys' eyes widened, fascinated to be the story's heroes. Dorothy had personalized the tale, weaving in details she knew about them, and crafting an adventure that blended familiar elements with age-appropriate fantasy. They lived in a big, beautiful house, but one day they discovered that the most precious treasure wasn't hidden in any special place. It was right beside them, in the heart of the family who loved them. Gradually, her voice grew softer and gentler, the rhythm of the narrative becoming slower and more hypnotic. The boys, initially alert and interested, began to blink more slowly, their bodies relaxing naturally. When she finished the story 15 minutes later, Mason and Logan were fast asleep. Dorothy remained seated for a few more minutes, making sure their sleep was deep before quietly leaving the room. In the hallway, she found Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara waiting, both with expressions of disbelief. "They fell asleep," whispered Jennifer, as if saying the words too loudly might break the spell. "Yes, ma'am, they did. And they'll sleep for at least an hour, maybe two." "How do you manage that?" asked Mrs. Barbara, her hostility temporarily replaced by genuine curiosity. "Children aren't difficult, Mrs. Barbara. They were just confused and scared. When they feel safe and understood, they cooperate naturally." It was an answer that made both women reflect on their own approaches. Jennifer realized she had been so stressed and desperate that she was passing her anxiety on to the children. Mrs. Barbara began to question whether her views on child-rearing methods were outdated. "Mrs. Johnson," Jennifer said after a moment, "I'd like to talk to you about a permanent arrangement. Could you come with me to the living room?" They went downstairs together, leaving Mrs. Barbara in the hallway, visibly torn between her initial disapproval and the undeniable evidence of the results. "I'll be direct with you," Jennifer began as they sat in the living room. "I need someone who can care for the children full-time. My husband has been traveling for 3 months. I need to return to work, and the children clearly respond well to you." "I understand, Mrs. Wilson. And what exactly would my role be?" "Caring for all 3 children, coordinating their routines, making sure they're well-fed, rested, and happy. Housekeeping can be left to someone else if you'd prefer to focus only on the children." "And Mrs. Barbara?" Dorothy asked diplomatically. "I've noticed she has some reservations." Jennifer sighed deeply. It was impossible to ignore the elephant in the room. "My mother-in-law is traditional. She has strong opinions about many things, including who should care for her grandchildren, but the children's needs come first." "I understand. And Mr. Richard? What's his opinion on hiring caregivers for the children?" My husband trusts my judgment on household and family matters. He'll see the results when he returns from his trip in 2 weeks. Dorothy nodded thoughtfully. 2 weeks would be enough time to establish a solid routine with the children and prove her worth, but it also meant 2 weeks enduring Mrs. Barbara's thinly veiled hostility. Mrs. Wilson, may I make a suggestion? Of course. What if we start with part-time for a few weeks? I could come in the mornings and stay through dinner but sleep at home. That would give everyone time to adjust, including Mrs. Barbara. It was a wise suggestion, showing political sensitivity as well as professional competence. Jennifer realized Dorothy wasn't just thinking about the job, but also the complex family dynamics that could affect her effectiveness in the long run. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. I accept your suggestion, Jennifer agreed. Let's try it for 2 weeks until Richard returns and then reassess. They sealed the agreement with a handshake, both feeling they had found a mutually beneficial solution. Jennifer finally had hope of resolving the crisis with the children, and Dorothy had a job opportunity that would allow her to use her natural skills. The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. Ethan woke up from his nap smiling and eager to interact, accepting his bottle without resistance. Mason and Logan woke up well-rested and in good spirits, playing cooperatively instead of competitively. By dinner time, Dorothy had established a natural routine that flowed without conflict or drama. The children knew what to expect, when to expect it, and most importantly, they felt safe and cared for. Aunt Dorothy, Mason asked while eating, are you coming back tomorrow? Yes, sweetheart. I'm going home to sleep now, but I'll be back early tomorrow. Why don't you sleep here? Logan wanted to know. Because I have my own little house, my own bed and my things there, but I'll be here during the day taking care of you. It was an honest explanation the children could understand. Dorothy didn't try to create unrealistic expectations or make promises she couldn't keep. Mrs. Barbara had observed the entire day with a critical eye, searching for flaws or signs of incompetence. To her frustration, she found none. On the contrary, she was forced to admit the children were calmer, more cooperative and happier than they'd been in months. As Dorothy prepared to leave, Mrs. Barbara approached her in the entryway. Miss Dorothy, she said, hesitating over how to address her. I need to ask you a few questions. Of course, Mrs. Barbara. Ask whatever you'd like. Do you have references from other jobs? Can you provide contacts from former employers? I can. I worked for the Williams family for 5 years, until their children grew up. And before that, I cared for Mrs. Oliver's for 3 years until she moved abroad. And why did you leave those jobs? As I said, the children grew up and no longer needed a caregiver. It's natural in my line of work for jobs to have an expiration date. Do you have any formal training? Any specific education in childcare? Dorothy hesitated for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but to consider how to explain her situation in a way Mrs. Barbara could understand. I don't have a college degree, if that's what you're asking, but I have 50 years of hands-on experience raising children, my own, the ones I fostered, and the families I've worked for. I've learned by observing, trying, making mistakes, and getting it right. That's not the same as professional training, Mrs. Barbara replied coldly. You're right, Mrs. Barbara. It's not the same. It's different. Not better or worse, just different. The answer partially disarmed the criticism. Dorothy wasn't trying to compete with or compare herself to professional nannies. She simply acknowledged she had a different approach based on life experience. Well, we'll see how it goes, Mrs. Barbara said, her voice still skeptical but slightly less hostile. We will, ma'am. Good night. Dorothy left the mansion with mixed feelings. She was optimistic about her relationship with the children and Jennifer, but she knew Mrs. Barbara would be a constant challenge. Women like her rarely changed their minds easily, and it would take a lot of tact and patience to earn her acceptance. On her way home, riding a bus across New York City from the south to the east side, Dorothy reflected on the day. She'd been through similar situations before. Wealthy families with complex problems, prejudices disguised as legitimate concern, children starved for genuine attention and affection. Her experience had taught her that every family had its own dynamics and emotional wounds. The Wilson children weren't difficult by nature. They were reacting to the stress and instability they felt in their home environment. With consistency, patience, and unconditional love, she knew she could help them find balance. She arrived home, a small two-bedroom house in Oakwood, which she shared with her younger sister, Shirley. The house was simple but cozy, decorated with family photos and plants she lovingly cared for. "Hey sis, how was your first day at the new job?" asked Shirley, who worked as a nursing assistant at a public hospital. "Interesting," replied Dorothy, kicking off her shoes and flopping onto the couch. "The kids are sweethearts. The mum is desperate but sensible, and the mother-in-law is going to be a challenge." "A challenge how?" "The kind who thinks a poor black woman can't properly take care of her grandkids." Shirley huffed, well familiar with the type of situation her sister described. "And why are you putting up with that?" "Because the kids need me, Shirl. You should see them. 3 little lost souls, scared, acting out because no one understands what they're feeling. If I can help these kids, it's worth dealing with a prejudiced old lady." It was a philosophy Dorothy had developed over the years: focus on what truly matters and not waste energy on people who'd never be willing to change their minds. The next morning, she arrived at the mansion at 7, finding Jennifer already dressed to leave. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. I need to leave early today for a meeting. Do you feel comfortable staying alone with the children?" "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. That's what I'm here for. Mrs. Barbara will be here around 9. She might want to oversee everything closely." "No problem. You can go with peace of mind." Jennifer left relieved, for the first time in months, dropping off her kids without guilt or worry. She knew Dorothy would take good care of them. The morning started smoothly. Ethan woke up in a good mood and took his bottle without fuss. Mason and Logan ate breakfast without a tantrum and played cooperatively, while Dorothy organized the baby's room. Mrs. Barbara arrived promptly at 9, dressed as if for an important social event, clearly prepared for a rigorous supervision session. "Good morning," she said coldly. "How are the children?" "Good morning, Mrs. Barbara. They're doing great. Ethan drank his bottle well, the boys had breakfast, and now they're playing. May I see?" "Of course, they're in the playroom." Mrs. Barbara inspected every corner, like a general reviewing troops. She looked for signs of neglect, disorder, or anything she could use as evidence of incompetence. To her frustration, everything was impeccable. Toys neatly arranged, children clean and happy. Ethan resting comfortably in his bouncer. "What did they have for breakfast?" she asked. Mason had chocolate milk and ate 2 slices of bread with butter. Logan preferred yogurt with granola and a banana. Ethan drank 6 ounces of milk. The detailed, precise answer only irritated Mrs. Barbara further. She had hoped to find carelessness or inattention to detail. "And what are they doing now?" "Building a city with blocks. I was teaching them about different professions: doctor, teacher, firefighter." "Are they learning it correctly?" she asked skeptically. "Why don't you ask them?" Dorothy suggested diplomatically. Mrs. Barbara approached her grandsons, who were deep in their construction. "Mason, what are you doing?" "Hi, Grandma. We're making a city. Look, this is the hospital where Aunt Dorothy said people work to take care of the sick." "And this is the school where kids learn important things," added Logan, pointing to a colorful building. "Aunt Dorothy said everyone in the city has an important job and we all need each other," Mason continued enthusiastically. Mrs. Barbara was surprised by the children's enthusiasm and engagement. Normally, they answered her questions with monosyllables or indifference. "Very good," she said mechanically, unsure how to react to the obvious success of the activity. The rest of the morning followed a similar pattern. Every attempt Mrs. Barbara made to find flaws ran into Dorothy's quiet but consistent competence. The children were engaged, happy, and learning, while the household routine flowed smoothly. At lunchtime, Mrs. Barbara watched again as Dorothy fed Ethan without any resistance, while the twins ate their meals without drama or negotiation. "How do you get them to eat so easily?" she asked, her curiosity overcoming her hostility. "Children eat better when they don't feel pressured," Dorothy explained. "If you turn mealtime into a battle, they'll fight. If you make it pleasant, they'll cooperate. The previous nannies tried to make meals pleasant, and it still didn't work. Maybe they were trying too hard. Sometimes the more you push, the more resistance you get." It was a sophisticated psychological observation from someone with no formal education. Mrs. Barbara began to wonder if she had underestimated Dorothy's intelligence and wisdom. During the afternoon nap, she observed the same routine that had worked the day before. Dorothy told another personalized story, this time about two children helping their grandma bake a magic cake, and the boys fell asleep without protest. "Do you always tell different stories?" Mrs. Barbara asked as they left the room. "Always. Children love novelty, but they also love personalization. When they're the heroes of the story, they feel special and important." "Where did you learn that?" "From telling stories to my own children. They taught me what worked and what didn't." "And your children, how are they now?" The question slipped out before Mrs. Barbara could stop herself. She felt genuine curiosity about the woman caring for her grandchildren so skillfully. "All grown up, working, some with kids of their own," Dorothy answered with quiet pride. "My oldest is an engineer. The eldest daughter is a teacher. The middle one works at a bank, and so on. They all went to school. Every one of them. I always told them education was the one thing no one could take away. I worked hard to make sure they had that opportunity." Mrs. Barbara fell silent, processing the information. A woman who had raised 6 children alone, all of whom became successful professionals, clearly had something to teach about parenting. "Why did you choose to care for other people's children?" "Because I love children and have a way with them. When mine grew up, I missed that purpose. Taking care of kids makes me happy." The simple, honest answer disarmed the last trace of Mrs. Barbara's open hostility. It was hard to argue with someone who clearly loved what she did and had the results to prove it. That afternoon, for the first time, Mrs. Barbara sat down for coffee with Dorothy while the children played in the garden. "Dorothy," she said hesitantly, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mrs. Barbara." "You never remarried?" "No. After my husband passed, when the boys were little, I focused on raising them. I didn't have time or energy for relationships. It must have been very hard, raising 6 children alone." "It was, but every challenge taught me something. I learned patience because I had no choice. I learned creativity because I had no money. I learned strength because my children needed me." Mrs. Barbara reflected on her own struggles raising her only son, Richard, even with ample financial resources and a present husband. The thought of doing it alone with 6 children seemed nearly impossible. "Did you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Taking on all that responsibility, sacrificing your own life for the kids." Dorothy smiled gently, an expression that lit up her entire face. "Mrs. Barbara, those weren't sacrifices, they were choices, and every choice brought me more joy than anything I could have done for myself." It was a perspective fundamentally different from what Mrs. Barbara knew. In the world she'd been raised in, personal sacrifice was seen as a loss, not a gain. The idea of finding fulfillment through serving others was almost incomprehensible. "But didn't you want things for yourself? Travel, nice clothes, a bigger house?" "Of course I did, but I wanted even more to see my children grow up healthy and happy, and I found that the more I gave to them, the more I got back." Just then, Mason and Logan came running inside, laughing and sweaty from playing in the yard. "Aunt Dorothy, come see what we built in the sand," Mason shouted. "It's a castle for you to live in," Logan added. The two grabbed Dorothy by the hand, pulling her outside to admire their creation. Mrs. Barbara followed, watching the affectionate interaction between the caregiver and the children. In the yard, she found an elaborate structure made of wet sand, decorated with flowers and leaves. It was clearly a child's work, but there was obvious creativity and care in the design. "Look, Aunt Dorothy, here's your bedroom. Here's the kitchen where you make yummy food for Ethan. And here's the living room where you tell stories," Mason explained excitedly. "And there's even a porch where you can have coffee with Grandma Barbara," Logan added, grinning at his grandmother. Mrs. Barbara felt something stir in her chest. The children had included her in their fantasy, creating a space where everyone could live together harmoniously. It was a spontaneous, generous inclusion that touched her deeply. "It's beautiful, boys," Dorothy said, genuinely impressed. "Can I take a picture to show my sister?" "Yes, yes," they cheered in unison. Dorothy snapped several photos with her simple phone while Mason and Logan proudly posed beside their creation. Mrs. Barbara watched the scene, noticing how naturally the children behaved around Dorothy, never needing to demand attention or cause trouble. When they went back inside, Ethan was waking from his afternoon nap. Dorothy picked him up, and he immediately snuggled against her, completely relaxed and trusting. He never did that with the other nannies, Mrs. Barbara observed. Babies sense when someone is truly comfortable with them, Dorothy explained. If you're nervous or unsure, they get nervous too. And you never get nervous? Of course I do sometimes. But when I'm caring for a child, I focus only on them. My personal worries stay aside. It was a skill Mrs. Barbara realized she'd never fully developed. Even when her own children were small, her mind had always been divided. Social appearances, others' judgments, family pressures. That afternoon, for the first time, Mrs. Barbara saw Dorothy not as an employee or an intruder, but as someone with genuine wisdom about children and family. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When Jennifer arrived home at 6 in the evening, she found a scene she hadn't seen in months. The 3 children calm and happy, the house tidy but not rigid, and her mother-in-law chatting amiably with Dorothy in the kitchen. "How was the day?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Wonderful," Dorothy replied. "The children were great. They ate well, napped well, played well. And you, Mrs. Barbara, what did you think?" Her mother-in-law hesitated for a moment, clearly reluctant to admit she'd changed her mind. "The children seemed to like her," she finally said. It was the closest thing to enthusiastic approval from Mrs. Barbara. Jennifer nearly smiled, recognizing the weight behind those carefully chosen words. During dinner, she observed the family dynamic for the first time in months without stress or anxiety. The children ate without fuss, chatted cheerfully about their day, and Ethan was visibly more relaxed and happy. "Aunt Dorothy," Mason asked, "tomorrow can you teach us how to make the cake from the story?" "What story?" Jennifer wanted to know. "Aunt Dorothy told us a story about 2 kids who helped their grandma bake a magic cake," Logan explained. "And maybe we can make a real one?" Mason insisted. Dorothy glanced at Jennifer, silently asking for permission. "Of course you can make a cake," Jennifer said, surprised by her own answer. Normally, the idea of little kids messing around in the kitchen would make her nervous. "But it'll make a mess," Mrs. Barbara protested automatically. "Mess cleans up, Mrs. Barbara," Dorothy said, "and kids learn a lot from cooking. Math with measurements, science with mixing, responsibility with cleaning up afterward." It was an educational perspective none of the previous nannies had offered. They all saw potentially messy activities as problems to avoid, not learning opportunities. "Fine," Mrs. Barbara conceded reluctantly, "but with proper supervision." "Of course, Ma'am. Always supervised." That night, after Dorothy left, Jennifer and Mrs. Barbara had their first honest conversation in months. "You have to admit, she's good at this," Jennifer said. "Good, yes," Mrs. Barbara agreed slowly. "But I still think it's too soon to make final judgments based on 2 days. Mrs. Barbara, 5 professional nannies couldn't do what she's done in 2 days. At some point, we have to acknowledge the evidence in front of us. It's not just about skill, Jennifer. It's about fit. Fit for what? For our family. For the kind of upbringing we want for the kids. For the values we want to pass on." Jennifer understood there was still resistance rooted in prejudices her mother-in-law couldn't articulate outright. Which values, specifically? Discipline, structure, preparation for the real world. These children will inherit serious responsibilities. They need to be ready. And you don't think being happy, secure, and emotionally stable is preparation for the real world? The questions silenced Mrs. Barbara. She'd spent her whole life believing that raising privileged children required strictness, emotional distance, and constant preparation for high expectations. The idea that happiness and emotional security might be more important was revolutionary to her worldview. "It's different from what I'm used to," she finally admitted. Maybe different is exactly what we need, Jennifer replied gently. On the third day, Dorothy arrived to find a noticeably more relaxed family. Jennifer no longer carried the constant anxiety of the previous days, and even Mrs. Barbara seemed less tense. The day passed without incident, following the routine established over the past 2 days. But by late afternoon, an unexpected event truly put Dorothy's skills to the test. Mason had climbed onto the couch to reach a toy on the high shelf and lost his balance, falling and hitting his head on the coffee table. The sound of the impact and the screams that followed made Dorothy rush from the kitchen where she was preparing snacks. She found the boy on the floor crying loudly with a bump quickly forming on his forehead. Mrs. Barbara stood frozen, clearly panicked, while Logan cried in fright at seeing his brother hurt. "It's okay, sweetheart, let me take a look," said Dorothy, carefully picking Mason up. She examined the injury with practiced hands, checking the boy's eyes, testing his response to simple stimuli, and assessing the severity of the injury. "Mason, can you hear me?" she asked calmly. "Yeah," the boy sniffled. "Do you have a headache?" "Just here," he said, pointing to the spot where he hit. "Are you seeing double or blurry?" "No." "Do you feel like throwing up?" "No." Mrs. Barbara watched the systematic evaluation with growing admiration. Dorothy was clearly following a mental protocol based on experience, checking for signs of concussion or serious injury. "Let's put some ice on the bump to reduce the swelling," she said, heading to the kitchen with Mason still in her arms. "Shouldn't we take him to the hospital?" asked Mrs. Barbara, following them. "It doesn't seem necessary. It's just a regular bump, no signs of serious injury, but we'll keep a close eye on him for the next few hours." She wrapped ice in a clean cloth and gently applied it to the injury, distracting Mason with a story about brave boys who fought dragons. "You were very brave, warrior Mason," she said. "Now you need to rest a little so the bump can heal." Within 15 minutes, Mason had calmed down and was playing normally, the swelling visibly reduced by the ice. Dorothy continued to observe him discreetly, but it was clear the injury wasn't serious. "How did you know what to do?" Mrs. Barbara asked when the children had gone back to playing. "Experience. I raised 6 children. I've seen plenty of bumps, cuts, and falls. I learned to recognize when it's serious and when it's not. And if it had been serious, then I'd have taken him to the hospital right away. But most of the time, they just need care, comfort, and observation." The incident marked a turning point in Mrs. Barbara's perception of Dorothy. Seeing how she had stayed calm, assessed the situation competently, and reassured both the injured child and the panicked adult, demonstrated a kind of skill that couldn't be learned from books or courses. When Jennifer arrived home that evening, she found Mason playing normally, only a small mark on his forehead indicating the afternoon's accident. "He fell and hit his head," Dorothy explained. "I administered first aid, applied ice, and watched for signs of concussion. He's fine, but it's good to keep an eye on him tonight." "Should I be worried?" "No, Mrs. Wilson. It's just a regular bump. But if he complains of a severe headache, vomits, or gets unusually drowsy, then you should see a doctor." The clear professional guidance put Jennifer completely at ease. Dorothy hadn't downplayed the incident, but she also hadn't caused unnecessary panic. "Thank you for taking such good care of him," Jennifer said, genuinely grateful. "That's what I'm here for, Ma'am." That night, Mrs. Barbara called Richard, who was at an international conference in London. "Richard, we need to talk about the situation at home," she said. "What's wrong, Mum? Are the kids okay?" They're actually doing great. It's about the new caregiver Jennifer hired." "Oh, right, Jennifer mentioned her, said she finally found someone competent. Why, is there a problem?" Mrs. Barbara hesitated, unsure how to articulate her conflicting feelings. "It's not exactly a problem, it's just she's very different from the others." "Different how?" "She's a black woman, older, with no college degree." "But Richard, she's extraordinary with the children." "You're saying that like it's an unpleasant surprise," Richard observed dryly. "That's not it. It's just, well, I had my prejudices, I'll admit. But this woman has a wisdom and competence none of the other nannies showed." Richard fell silent for a moment, processing that his mother was admitting to having had prejudices. "And how do you feel about it now?" "Confused, to be honest. I've spent my whole life believing formal qualifications were what mattered most. But this woman taught me that life experience can be just as valuable as a diploma. Mom, can I say something? Richard asked gently. Of course. Are the kids happy? They are. Happier than I've seen them in months. Is Jennifer more at ease? She is, much more. Is the household running smoothly? Perfectly well. Then what's the real problem? Mrs. Barbara was quiet for a long moment. What was the real problem? The children were well cared for. Her daughter-in-law was relieved. The house was organized, and she'd even grown fond of Dorothy. I think the problem is me, she finally admitted. My outdated ideas about who can or can't properly care for children. And is that a problem that can be fixed? I'm trying, son, I really am. When Richard hung up, he smiled for the first time in weeks. His mother had taken the first step in overcoming prejudices she hadn't even realized she held. More importantly, his family was finally finding peace. Back in New York City, Dorothy arrived home after another successful day. Shirley was waiting with dinner ready and curiosity about how the new job was going. Is the mother-in-law still giving you trouble? She asked as they served the plates. Less. I think she's starting to see I can really help the children. And do you like the work? I love it, Dorothy answered without hesitation. Those 3 kids have so much love to give. They were just confused and scared because no one was speaking their language. What language? Patience, consistency, genuine affection. Kids don't need complicated methods. They need adults who truly care about them. Shirley watched her sister, noticing how renewed and energized she seemed. Dorothy had always been maternal, but there was a difference between raising your own children out of love and choosing to care for someone else's out of calling. Do you think you'll stay there long? I hope so. When the father gets back from his trip, we'll see how he reacts. But the kids are happy, and that's what matters. And if he doesn't approve, then I'll find another family. But I'll miss those little ones. The following week, the routine Dorothy had established settled in completely. The children woke up excited knowing she was coming, cooperated with every activity, and showed remarkable emotional growth. Jennifer managed to return to full-time work for the first time since Ethan was born, confident the kids were in capable hands. Her productivity improved significantly, and co-workers remarked on how rested and confident she looked. Mrs. Barbara had begun participating more actively in the children's activities, learning from Dorothy's methods and discovering aspects of her grandchildren she'd missed before. The rigidity that had always characterized her approach to parenting was gradually replaced by surprising flexibility. The real test came on Friday of the second week, when Richard called to say he'd be returning over the weekend, 2 days earlier than planned. He wants to assess the situation himself, Jennifer explained to Dorothy. Do you feel ready to meet him? Of course, Mrs. Wilson. The children will show him how well they're doing. And if he has objections, then we'll talk. Men sometimes have different ideas about childcare, but they're usually reasonable when they see results. Truthfully, Dorothy was more nervous than she let on. Richard was a wild card, a successful businessman used to controlling every situation who had been absent during the hardest months with the children. His reaction could define the future of their arrangement. Richard arrived on Saturday afternoon, exhausted from his trip, but eager to see his family. He expected to find the same chaotic situation he'd left 3 months earlier. Difficult children, a stressed wife, a critical mother, and yet another temporary nanny trying to manage the impossible. Instead, he was greeted at the door by 2 cheerful boys who ran into his arms, chattering excitedly about the week's adventures. "Daddy, Daddy, Aunt Dorothy taught us how to bake a cake," Mason shouted. "And she tells the best stories in the world," Logan added. "And Ethan doesn't cry anymore, he's happy all the time," Mason informed him. Richard hugged his sons, struck by the positive energy they radiated. In the months before his trip, the children had always seemed tense, irritable, or tearful when he came home. "Where is this famous Aunt Dorothy?" he asked. "In the kitchen, helping Mommy with lunch," Logan said, tugging his hand. In the kitchen, Richard found Jennifer smiling as she prepared an elaborate meal, while a middle-aged black woman held Ethan comfortably, whispering softly to the baby. Richard, Jennifer rushed to embrace him. How was the trip? Long, he replied, but his eyes were fixed on the scene before him. Ethan, who usually cried around strangers, was completely relaxed in the arms of a woman who clearly wasn't one of the qualified nannies he'd expected to find. This is Dorothy Johnson, Jennifer introduced. Dorothy, this is my husband, Richard. Dorothy stepped forward with Ethan, who reached his little arms out to his father, without any sign of stress or fuss. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Richard. The children have talked about you so much. Richard took his son, surprised by how calm and smiling he was. Ethan usually fussed when he returned from trips, needing time to readjust to his father's presence. Hi, little man, he murmured, touched by the warm welcome. He missed his daddy, Dorothy said. This morning, when the boys mentioned you were coming, he perked up like he understood. Richard studied the woman with curiosity. There was something different about her compared to other caregivers, a natural calm, quiet confidence, a genuine connection with the children. The kids seem different, he observed. They're happier, Jennifer confirmed. Dorothy managed to establish a routine that works for everyone. May I ask how? Richard asked Dorothy directly. Every child has their own personality, Mr. Richard. The secret is figuring out what each one needs and adjusting your approach. Mason thrives on challenges and responsibility. Logan needs more calm and patience. Ethan just wanted to feel safe and understood. It was a sophisticated psychological assessment of his own children, expressed simply but precisely. Richard, who had studied business and was used to evaluating professional competence, immediately recognized the practical intelligence behind her words. And how long did it take to establish this routine? Just a few days for them to get used to me, and a week to find the rhythm that works best. A week, repeated Richard, impressed. The other nannies tried for weeks without success. Maybe they were trying to mold the children to their method, instead of adapting the method to the children. The observation revealed a fundamental understanding of child rearing that went beyond formal training. Richard began to see why his mother had been so impressed. During lunch, he observed the family dynamics with an analytical eye. The children ate without fuss, chatted cheerfully, and naturally included Dorothy in their conversations as if she had been part of the family for years. Aunt Dorothy, said Mason, tell Dad about the city we built in the garden. What city? Richard asked. We made a sand city where everyone has an important job, explained Logan. Aunt Dorothy said all jobs are necessary. That's right, Dorothy confirmed. The doctor takes care of health, the teacher educates, the garbage collector keeps everything clean, the baker makes bread. Everyone is important. Richard noticed how the explanation included professions from different social levels, teaching the children about the value and dignity of work without prejudiced hierarchies. That's an important lesson, he agreed. After lunch, Mrs. Barbara arrived for her planned meeting with her son. Richard greeted her warmly, curious to hear her assessment of the new caregiver. So, Mum, what do you think of things here? Mrs. Barbara looked at Dorothy, who was quietly organizing the children's toys in the living room, then at her grandchildren playing harmoniously. I must admit, I was wrong about many things, she finally said. Wrong how? I thought professional competence only came from diplomas and formal references. This woman has shown me wisdom can come from different places. Richard was surprised. His mother rarely admitted she was wrong about anything, especially when it came to her grandchildren's upbringing. And how do you feel about that? Humbled, she answered honestly, and grateful. My grandchildren are happy for the first time in months. By late afternoon, Richard asked to speak with Dorothy privately. They stepped into the garden where they could talk without interruptions. Mrs. Dorothy, I need to be direct with you, he began. This isn't what I expected to find when I came back. Dorothy braced herself for a respectful but firm dismissal. I expected to find another temporary nanny struggling to control an impossible situation, Richard continued. Instead, I find my children transformed, my wife rested, and even my mother admitting she was wrong about her opinions. The children just needed consistency and understanding, Mr. Richard. Maybe, but achieving that with 3 young kids, a stressed wife and a difficult mother-in-law isn't an easy task. Every challenge has a solution. You just need patience to find it. Richard studied Dorothy's face, searching for signs of falseness or manipulation. He found only quiet sincerity and unassuming competence. May I ask you some personal questions? Of course. Why did you choose to work with families? Because I love children and have experience with them. When my own kids grew up, I missed having little ones to care for. And your children? How are they now? All grown, working, some already married. I raised 6 on my own after my husband passed. 6 children alone? Richard did the math in his head. That must have been challenging, yes, but rewarding. Each child taught me something different about patience, love, and determination. And now you want to teach those same things to other children? I want to help other families find harmony. Happy children grow up to become better adults. Richard nodded, impressed by the simple yet profound philosophy behind Dorothy's work. Would you be willing to stay with us full-time? I can offer you your own room, a competitive salary, and full benefits. Dorothy hesitated for a moment. The offer was generous, but it meant a significant change in her life. May I think about moving here? I'd like to talk to my sister first. Of course, but may I ask what concerns you have? They're not concerns, Mr. Richard. It's just that change is always a big decision. I need to consider everything carefully. Richard respected the honesty and thoughtfulness of her answer. Someone who made major decisions hastily probably wouldn't be the best person to care for his children long term. That evening, after Dorothy had left, the family gathered to discuss the future. She's perfect for the children, said Jennifer. She's capable and wise, agreed Mrs. Barbara. And the children clearly adore her, Richard added. So why hesitate? Jennifer asked. I'm not hesitating about hiring her, Richard clarified. I'm thinking about how to make sure she feels like a true part of our family, not just an employee. It was an important distinction, showing how deeply Richard understood the special bond Dorothy had formed with the children. What do you have in mind? I want to offer more than just a job. I want to offer a partnership in raising the children, with the respect and autonomy that comes with it. The next day, Richard spoke with Dorothy again, this time with a more detailed proposal. Mrs. Dorothy, I'd like to make an offer that's different from what's usually done in these situations. I'm listening. I don't just want to hire a caregiver. I'd like to invite you to be an integral part of my children's upbringing. That means having the freedom to make decisions about routines, activities, and discipline, a salary that reflects the responsibility, and being treated as a valued member of the family, not just an employee. Dorothy was silent for a moment, processing the generous offer and the responsibility it carried. And what do you expect in return? Just keep doing exactly what you're doing, caring for my children as if they were your own, with love, wisdom, and dedication. May I give you an answer tomorrow? Of course. That night, Dorothy spoke at length with Shirley about the proposal. It's an incredible opportunity, sis, her sister said. But are you sure you want to get so deeply involved with another family? It's different from just being superficially involved, Dorothy replied. These children need someone who genuinely cares, and I do. What if it doesn't work out? What if you get too attached and then have to leave? It's a risk, but some things in life are worth risking for. And you think this is? Dorothy thought of Mason and Logan's smiles, the trust Ethan showed in her arms, the gratitude in Jennifer's eyes, and the gradual but real shift in Mrs. Barbara's attitude. I think it is. The next morning she gave Richard her answer. I accept your offer, Mr. Richard, but with one condition. What is it? That if I ever feel I'm no longer serving the children's best interests, or if you believe a different approach is needed, we can talk honestly and make changes without hard feelings. I completely agree. And may I add a condition of my own? Of course. That you help us become better parents. We want to learn from your experience and wisdom. It was a humble request from a successful man who recognized that professional competence didn't automatically translate to parenting skills. It would be my pleasure, Mr. Richard. And so began a new chapter in the Wilson family's life. Dorothy moved into the maids' quarters, which had been renovated and decorated to become a comfortable and welcoming space. But more important than the physical changes were the shifts in family dynamics. Richard learned to better balance work and family, inspired by Dorothy's example of unwavering dedication. Jennifer discovered that motherhood could be joyful rather than stressful when there was proper support and shared wisdom. Mrs. Barbara overcame decades of prejudice and developed a genuine friendship with a woman she had initially deemed unsuitable. And the children. Mason became more responsible and confident, Logan more sociable and expressive, and Ethan grew into a secure, happy baby who trusted the world around him. 6 months later, the family received an unexpected visit. One of their former nannies, Catherine, returned from a trip abroad and heard through an agency about the situation in the Wilson household. "I came to see how the children are doing," she told Jennifer. "I'll admit, I was curious about how you finally resolved things." "We resolved it by finding the right person," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "May I meet this miracle worker?" Catherine asked, her skepticism barely concealed. In the garden, they found Dorothy overseeing an elaborate activity. Mason and Logan were teaching Ethan, now a year and a half old, to walk around soft obstacles. The baby giggled with delight at every wobbly step, while his brothers cheered him on with claps and shouts of joy. "Children," Dorothy called, "come greet our guest." The three approached naturally, Mason and Logan polite but confident, Ethan hiding shyly behind Dorothy's skirt. "Nice to meet you," Mason said, extending his hand as he'd been taught. "Ty," Logan said with a genuine smile. Ethan simply waved from the safety of his makeshift hiding spot. Catherine watched the interaction with growing surprise. Were these the same impossible children who had made her professional life a nightmare just a few months earlier? "How did you do it?" she asked Dorothy directly. "Do what?" "Get them to behave like this. When I worked here, they were uncontrollable." Dorothy glanced at the children, who had gone back to playing, then back at Catherine. Maybe they weren't uncontrollable. Maybe they were trying to communicate something no one understood. Communicate what? That they needed security, consistency, and unconditional love. Once they had that, they no longer needed to act out for attention. Catherine fell silent, processing the simple yet revealing explanation. She had spent weeks trying to control their behavior without ever considering the emotional needs behind it. "And how did you figure out what they needed?" "By watching, listening, trying to see the world through their eyes." "They didn't teach that in my professional training." "Perhaps because it's not something you can learn from books," Dorothy replied gently. "Some things you only learn by living." When Catherine left, she carried with her a valuable lesson about the difference between technical skill and human wisdom, and a newfound humility about the limitations of her formal education. Ethan's first birthday under Dorothy's care was celebrated with a party that brought both families together, the Wilsons and Dorothy's relatives. It was the first time their two social worlds had mingled in the same space. Shirley came with her children. Some of Dorothy's own children brought their kids, and the house filled with children of all ages playing together, completely unaware of any socio-economic differences. "I've never seen anything like this," remarked one of the Olivers' neighbors, observing the harmonious mix of people from such different backgrounds. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" replied Jennifer, watching Mason and Logan playing naturally with the poorer children, without any sign of superiority or discomfort. "How did you manage this?" "We didn't manage anything. Dorothy taught our children that people are people, no matter where they come from or how much money they have." During the party, Richard watched his children interacting with the kids from Dorothy's family. There was a naturalness and absence of prejudice that he knew was rare among children of his social class. "Dorothy," he said, approaching her. "Thank you." "For what, Mr. Richard?" "For teaching my children about humanity. That's more valuable than any formal education I could give them. The children already had it in them. They just needed permission to express it." At the end of the party, Mrs. Barbara made a toast that surprised everyone. "I want to thank Dorothy Johnson for teaching me that wisdom has no color, education has no social class, and love has no borders. My grandchildren were lucky to find her. but I was even luckier to learn from her. It was a public declaration that marked not just Dorothy's full acceptance, but also the recognition of her own personal transformation. 2 years passed. Mason and Logan started school, but always rushed home, eager to tell Aunt Dorothy about their daily adventures. Ethan grew into a confident and happy child, speaking early and showing an affectionate personality. Richard had learned to balance work and family, taking a more active role in his children's upbringing. Jennifer had successfully resumed her career, knowing the kids were in capable and loving hands. And Dorothy. She had found a second family that valued her, not just for what she did, but for who she was. One Sunday afternoon, as the whole family gathered in the garden, Ethan approached Dorothy with a scribbled drawing. "Aunt Dorothy, I made something for you," he said in his still childish but clear speech. "What is it, sweetheart?" "It's our family," he explained, pointing at the colorful figures on the paper. "Here's Daddy, here's Mommy, here's me, here's Mason and Logan, here's Grandma Barbara, and here's you." Dorothy looked at the drawing and saw herself at the center, surrounded by all the other figures. To the mind of a 3-year-old, she wasn't an employee or a caregiver. She was simply family. "It's beautiful, Ethan. I'll keep it forever." "Do you like our family, Aunt Dorothy?" "I love you, my angel. So very much." And so a woman who had started out looking for a cleaning job ended up finding something far more precious, a second chance at motherhood, the opportunity to use her wisdom to transform lives, and the discovery that true love knows no social, racial, or economic barriers. The 5 nannies hadn't succeeded because they tried to apply methods to children rather than understand them first. Dorothy shocked everyone not by doing anything extraordinary, but by doing the simplest and most fundamental things: loving unconditionally, listening patiently, and responding with wisdom. And sometimes, that's all a child needs to flourish. Someone who looks beyond the difficult behavior, recognizes the special person behind the tantrums, and has enough patience to find the key that unlocks the heart of each unique and precious little human. The end. What did you think of this family's transformation? Have you ever been in a similar situation where someone unexpected brought solutions that qualified professionals couldn't? Share your experience in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories about overcoming challenges and family love. Your support means the world to us.